August 13th, 2016. Think back to that summer. You were probably, like many of us, caught up in the whole Clinton versus Trump news cycle.
Yeah, that dominated everything.
But while all that was happening, something else, well, extraordinary, was going down online. A digital tremor that really shook the foundations of global cybersecurity.
Extraordinary is putting it mildly. That night, this message just pops up on GitHub, the code sharing site.
Looked like gibberish to most people, I imagine.
To most, yeah. Just a jumble. But for the cybersecurity experts, the ones really in the know, it was like a massive alarm bell going off. Seemed to a breach like nothing they'd ever seen before.
And that alarm bell announced the story we're diving deep into today. People call it the greatest hack in history. It's the story of how the NSA's absolute elite cyber unit, the Equation Group, got hacked by this really mysterious group calling themselves the Shadow Brokers.
That's one.
So, for everyone tuning in, our mission today is to unpack this whole thing. How did this even happen? What kind of crazy tools did they get their hands on? And crucially, what were the consequences? We'll try to do it without getting lost in, super technical jargon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Keep it understandable, but get into the real meat of it. And for our deep dive, we're leaning heavily on a really detailed account. It's from a YouTube transcript by Shortery.
Okay.
It does a great job laying out the timeline, the key players. It's like a real-life cyber thriller script.
Right. So before the Shadow Brokers burst onto the scene, let's talk about who they hit. The Equation Group. These weren't just script kiddies.
Oh, absolutely not. This was the NSA's crown jewel, their most sophisticated unit. Think of them creating digital stealth bombers.
Cyber weapons, basically.
Top-tier cyber weapons. These were the folks behind things like Stuxnet. You remember that?
Yeah.
The malware that famously hit Iran's nuclear program. Super complex stuff.
And the name, Equation Group, that wasn't their internal name, right?
No. That came from outside. In cybersecurity, when you find traces of hackers but don't know exactly who they are, you give them these code names.
Like Fancy Bear or Lazarus Group.
Precisely. Fancy Bear, often linked to Russian military intel. Charming Kitten, thought to be Iranian. Lazarus Group, tied to North Korea. Equation Group was the name given by Kaspersky, the Russian security firm.
Why Equation?
Because the malware they found linked to this group was just incredibly complex, mathematically sophisticated. So Equation Group stuck.
Okay. And the tools they built. It sounds like something out of James Bond. You mentioned a few earlier.
Yeah, some of the alleged tools were pretty wild. Take Cottonmouth, sounds harmless, right?
Yeah.
But it was supposedly a USB plug.
Just a normal-looking plug.
Exactly. But it could secretly intercept and wirelessly beam out everything. Keystrokes, mouse clicks, the works.
Wow, okay.
Then there was Dropout G. This was iPhone malware. Imagine you could supposedly grab your messages, contacts, voicemails, even turn on the mic and camera remotely, track your location.
Terrifying. Complete surveillance in your pocket.
Pretty much. Yeah. And another one, Rage Master. This was clever. A little plug for the VGA port on a computer, the old monitor connector. Yeah. It could wirelessly transmit everything being shown on the screen, so someone nearby could just see your display.
Unbelievable. And these are just a few examples.
Just a handful from what was reportedly a huge arsenal, highly advanced, very secret tools. And then, that August night, the Shadow Brokers basically say, guess what? We've got them.
Their announcement must have hit like a bomb.
It really did. That GitHub message, written in this kind of broken English, which made it even stranger.
Added to the confusion, maybe.
Initially, yeah. You might have thought it was a joke, some kind of weird prank. But for the cybersecurity community, it was, like you said, a digital earthquake, a massive shift in what they thought was possible.
Because the message, despite the grammar, was crystal clear on the main point.
Undeniably clear. The NSA, specifically their best team, the Equation Group, had been breached, hacked.
And they didn't just claim it, they showed proof.
That was the kicker. They didn't just talk. They posted actual files.
Yeah.
Said they were straight off NSA servers. Tools capable of getting into almost anything.
And we know now, looking back, what the consequences were.
Oh, yeah. The foreshadowing is chilling.
Darn.
These exact tools, or variations of them, were later used in devastating attacks like WannaCry and NotPetya.
We'll get more into those later, but the scale was massive.
Billions in damage. Hospitals shut down. Banks, companies paralyzed. Real lives put at risk. All stemming from this initial leak.
So Shadow Brokers make their entrance, say, we hacked the NSA's hackers, and then what? They put the tools up for sale.
They did. They announced an auction for the whole stolen arsenal and the asking price. 1 million Bitcoin.
1 million Bitcoin. What was that worth back in 2016?
At the time, it was close to $500 million US. A staggering amount. Talk about aiming high.
That's audacious doesn't even cover it. Did they expect to get it?
Who knows? But to prove they had the goods, they offered a sample. A taster?
Well, what was the sample?
It was a zero-day exploit. A piece of malware targeting firewalls made by Cisco and Fortinet, two huge network security companies.
And 0 day means?
It means the companies themselves, Cisco and Fortinet, had 0 days warning. They didn't know this vulnerability existed. So even if your systems were fully patched, totally up to date.
You were still vulnerable.
Exactly. This exploit could get past defenses that were thought to be secure.
And did Cisco and Fortinet confirm this?
They did. Very quickly. They had to. They confirmed the vulnerabilities were real, that they hadn't known about them, and rushed out emergency patches.
Wow. That confirmation must have just poured fuel on the fire.
Absolutely. It proved the shadow brokers weren't bluffing. They had real, potent NSA cyber weapons. The global reaction was immediate.
News outlets everywhere must have picked it up.
All the major ones, The Guardian, The Atlantic, Wired, New York Times. It blew up, went from a tech story to a massive national security crisis overnight. International implications, everything.
You mentioned earlier comparing this to the Edward Snowden leaks. Why was this potentially even more serious?
Well, Snowden leaked documents about NSA programs, code names, methods, targets. Highly sensitive, yes. But the shadow brokers, they leaked the actual tools, the source code for the cyber weapons themselves.
So it's the difference between leaking the plans for a missile and actually giving someone the missile.
That's a good analogy. Leaked documents tell your adversaries what you can do. Leaked code lets them do it themselves. Maybe even modify and improve the weapons. It's a whole different level of threat.
Understandably, the FBI and other agencies launched a huge investigation.
Massive. Top priority became, who are these shadow brokers? How on earth did they get these tools? And just how much did they actually steal?
What were the initial theories about who was behind it?
Well, given the timing, 2016 election year, tensions high, Russia was a prime suspect.
Because of the DNC hack and disinformation campaigns already happening?
Exactly. There was already intense focus on Russian cyber activity aimed at the U.S. Then Vice President Biden even issued a pretty public warning to Russia around that time. So the theory was maybe this was another part of that campaign. Destabilization, leverage.
Makes sense. But it wasn't the only theory, right?
Oh, no. Another strong possibility was an inside job. A disgruntled NSA employee or contractor? Maybe a new Edward Snowden, as some people were saying. Someone with access who decided to leak the tools.
The insider threat, always a major concern.
Always. And then there was the simpler explanation. Maybe it was just incredibly skilled cybercriminals who saw a massive payday. That million Bitcoin auction looked like pure profit motive.
So theories swirling, investigation ramping up. What happened with that $500 million auction? Did anyone bite?
That's one of the strangest parts. The auction basically fizzled. After 24 hours, the bids totaled something like 1.5 Bitcoin.
1.5 Bitcoin out of $1 million.
Yeah, less than $1,000 at the time. A huge flop compared to their asking price.
That must have been confusing for investigators.
Definitely a mixed bag for the FBI. On one hand, relief. Okay, these ultra-dangerous tools aren't just being bought up by the highest bidder immediately.
But on the other hand?
On the other hand, what does this group do now? If they can't get the money, are they just going to dump everything, release it all for free? The uncertainty must have been intense.
So the auction fails. What was the broker's next move?
They didn't just disappear. They came back with a second file dump. And this time, the message accompanying it was different. More aggressive, more political, almost taunting.
Who are they targeting in this message?
They went straight for the White House, specifically mentioning Joe Biden with this really disrespectful nickname, Dirty Grandpa.
Okay, so getting personal, what else did they say?
They started questioning U.S. intelligence priorities, asking why the CIA seemed to be leading cyber ops against Russia instead of the NSA or Cyber Command. It almost felt like they were trying to stir trouble within the U.S. government.
That's a weird turn. What was the point of that?
It signaled a potential shift. They also lashed out at the media, claiming it was controlled and deliberately ignoring the leak's significance. Said there was no free press.
So less about money now, more about ideology, grievances.
It started to look that way. And then they dropped this line, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend," seemingly positioning Russia as an ally against what they call the deep state in the U.S.
Wow, okay, so maybe the auction was just a smokescreen. Or maybe they got radicalized by the lack of bids.
Hard to say for sure. But the narrative definitely shifted from pure profit to to something more like political or ideological warfare. They seem to be positioning themselves against the U.S. establishment.
And the files they released the second time, were they more exploits?
Not exactly exploits this time. It was a list IP addresses, websites, domain names that they claimed were infrastructure used by the NSA for their own cyber attacks around the world.
Could that be verified?
Cybersecurity experts jumped on it. And yes, analysis confirmed that many of these IPs were legitimate and had been linked to suspected NSA operations in the past. So while not new tools, it was still damaging, potentially exposing past NSA actions and methods. Operational security compromised.
Meanwhile, the official investigation, spinning its wheels.
Seemed like it. The pressure was immense. A huge breach, perpetrators still unknown, taunting messages online. They weren't finding any clear digital fingerprints. The shadow brokers were like ghosts.
Which would lead back to the insider theory?
Increasingly, yes. The lack of external traces made an internal leak seem more and more likely. And with the election looming, the political pressure to find someone accountable, maybe even a scapegoat, was intense. 2 major hacks close together the DNC, and now this was a huge embarrassment.
Enter Harold T. Martin III. How did the focus shift to him?
It reportedly started with a really bizarre cryptic tweet from an account named 99999999999. The account bio had strange phrases, something in French about death and war and mercenaries, linked to an old video of a Blackwater sniper.
It's just weird. And that triggered suspicion.
Apparently, yes. It raised enough red flags high up in U.S. intelligence. They looked into who might be behind it, and that led them to Martin.
What was his background? Why
She fit a profile. Former Navy guy. Worked for years as a government contractor for Booz Allen Hamilton.
Same company as Snowden.
Exactly. And crucially, Martin worked with the NSA's Tailored Access Operations Group, the TAO. That's the elite hacking unit. That's the Equation Group.
So he had the access, direct access to the group that got hacked.
He had the access. He worked at the NSA facility at Fort Meade. The connection was direct.
Still circumstantial at that point, though.
It was. But it was enough for then Attorney General Loretta Lynch to authorize a search warrant. And the raid on his house in Maryland was dramatic.
How so?
Full-scale operation. Dozens of FBI agents, SWAT teams involved, flashbang grenades, a major show of force for executing a search warrant.
What did they find? Clearly they expected something big.
They found something astronomical. An unbelievable quantity of classified material. Around 50 terabytes of data.
50 terabytes? That's immense.
It's staggering. Classified documents from the NSA, CIA, U.S. Cyber Command, the NRO, stretching back almost 20 years. Just sitting there in his house, unsecured. Piles of physical documents, hard drives.
Including top secret material.
Yes. Documents with the highest classification levels, stuff meant only for people with very specific clearances and a strict need to know. He seemed to be hoarding data on a massive scale.
So they definitely found someone who mishandled classified info on an epic scale. The perfect scapegoat, perhaps.
He certainly looked like the likely leaker at that moment. The sheer volume was damning. But the crucial question remained. Was he the shadow brokers? Did this haul directly link him to the leaks?
I did it.
Well, after Martin's arrest in August 2016, things went quiet. The shadow brokers stopped posting. For about 2 months, silence. It looked like maybe they had caught their guy.
But then,
in October 2016, they came back. Another message popped up online.
proving Martin, who was in custody, couldn't be sending messages.
Exactly. Yeah. This new message announced they were ditching the auction. Said they were bored with auction.
So what was the new plan?
A crowdfunding model. They basically said, if people collectively donate 10,000 Bitcoin, they'd release the password to the remaining encrypted files they still held.
10,000 Bitcoin. Still a lot, but much less than 1 million.
A more achievable target, perhaps. But the message also contained something else. Really bizarre.
What was that?
This completely unsubstantiated, frankly weird story about Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch supposedly meeting on a plane in Arizona back in 2006. The details were salacious and totally irrelevant to the hack.
Why include that?
Who knows? Maybe more misdirection, or just adding to the chaos. Importantly, though, they didn't release any new files with this message. But the post itself proved 2 things. 1, shadow brokers were still active, and 2, Harold Martin wasn't the one posting.
Must have thrown the FBI's case into confusion. They have Martin, but the leaks, or at least the online persona, continue.
Precisely. Then came the U.S. election, November 2016. Donald Trump wins. How did that change the dynamic?
Initially, there was some perception, maybe based on campaign talk, that Trump might be friendlier towards Russia.
Right. And since some suspected Russia was behind the brokers, maybe things would calm down. Or maybe the brokers, if they were anti-establishment, would see Trump as an ally.
But that perception didn't last long, did it?
No. The turning point seemed to be April 2017. President Trump ordered a military strike against Syria, which is a key Russian ally.
And the shadow brokers reacted to that.
Very strongly. They released what turned out to be their last major public message. It was a post on Medium titled, "Don't Forget Your Base."
Addressed to Trump directly.
Directly to Trump. It was scathing. Expressed total dissatisfaction, a feeling of betrayal. They even claimed they voted for him and felt abandoned. Accused him of siding with, quote, Israeli nationalists, Zionists, and Goldman Sachs instead of his base.
This is way beyond hacking talk. This is pure political grievance.
Absolutely. A huge shift from the earlier messages. They were clearly angry, disillusioned, and attached to this angry rant was the payload.
The final piece.
At the very end of the message, they just posted it. The password. The password to decrypt most, if not all, of the remaining stolen files they've been holding back.
Why? Why give it away after trying to sell it?
It seems the motive changed completely. Forget profit. This looked like pure defiance, an act of digital revenge against the U.S. government, triggered by that Syria strike. To the FBI, this was nightmare territory.
A full-scale cyber-terrorist attack, some might say.
That's how it was likely viewed internally, yeah. Because now, these incredibly powerful NSA tools were essentially public property. Anyone could potentially access and use them.
And the contents of that final dump were extensive.
Massive. A huge collection of potent cyber weapons, something like 67 Windows executables, tons of zero-day exploits we hadn't seen before, IP addresses, system drivers, Trojan horses, the works, the NSA's toolkit out in the open.
You mentioned one specific capability earlier that was particularly alarming.
Yes, the ability to edit Windows event logs. Before this, the standard thinking was you could maybe delete logs, wipe your tracks that way. But surgically altering individual entries, that was considered NSA-level capability.
Why is that so significant?
Because event logs are crucial for digital forensics. They're the record of what happened on a system. If you can change that record without leaving obvious signs, you can frame people, hide intrusions. It fundamentally undermines trust in system logs. And overnight, that capability went from nation-state exclusive to potentially anyone.
But the crown jewel of that final leak, the one that caused the most immediate damage, was Eternal Blue.
Without a doubt, Eternal Blue. That was the big one.
Explain why it was so dangerous.
It targeted a vulnerability in a really old but widely used Windows networking protocol called SMBv1, Server Message Block version 1.
Why was it still so widely used if it was old?
Compatibility, mostly. Lots of older devices, printers, file shares relied on it. So Microsoft kept it enabled by default in many Windows versions for a long time. This created a huge attack surface, millions and millions of machines worldwide.
And what did Eternal Blue do to those machines?
It allowed an attacker to send specially crafted data packets to a vulnerable machine over the network and basically run any code they wanted on that machine, remotely, without need a password or anything.
Direct backdoor.
A direct, remotely exploitable backdoor into potentially hundreds of millions of Windows computers. Developed by the NSA, now leaked to the world.
And the consequences weren't theoretical. They came fast.
Devastatingly fast. Just 1 month after the shadow brokers leaked Eternal Blue, in May 2017, we saw the WannaCry ransomware attack explode globally.
I remember WannaCry. It was everywhere.
It was chaos. It used Eternal Blue to spread like wildfire. Infected over 200,000 computers, estimates say, in 150 countries.
And the impact?
Crippling. Hospitals in the UK had to turn away patients, cancel surgeries. Companies like FedEx, Renault, Telefonica, major corporations hit hard. Banks, infrastructure. The economic damage was in the billions. Billions. All because of WannaCry, which was enabled by Eternal Blue.
A tool built by the NSA, leaked by shadow brokers, used by, well, who did they say used it for WannaCry?
And the U.S. government, along with others, eventually publicly attributed the WannaCry attack specifically to North Korea.
Okay, so backtracking slightly. What happened to Harold Martin, the guy they raided?
He eventually pleaded guilty, but not to being a shadow broker. He pleaded guilty to the willful retention of national defense information, essentially hoarding all that classified data.
And his sentence?
He received 9 years in federal prison and a large fine, $250,000. But crucially, despite that mountain of data, investigators never found that definitive smoking gun linking him directly to the leaks carried out by the shadow brokers online.
So he was punished for the hoarding, but the brokers themselves remained a mystery.
Exactly. And there was even a legal wrinkle. Some of his initial statements to the FBI during that dramatic raid were ruled inadmissible because The court found he wasn't properly Mirandized before questioning began. So, Martin serves time, but the identity of the shadow brokers, still unknown.
Which brings us back to that uncomfortable point. The tool that caused all that WannaCry chaos, Eternal Blue, that wasn't made by the shadow broker.
No, it was made by the NSA, funded by U.S. taxpayers, developed presumably for intelligence gathering or offensive cyber operations. The brokers just released it.
Which raises huge questions about responsibility, doesn't it? The risks of creating and keeping these kinds of weapons in the first place.
Profound questions about oversight, security, unintended consequences, the entire ethics of developing these digital tools that can cause such widespread harm if they get out.
And to this day, no definitive answer on who the shadow broker is.
Still an enigma. Was it Russia, North Korea, maybe an insider or multiple insiders, disgruntled Americans? A foreign power posing as hacktivists. We just don't know for sure.
What we do know is they pulled off perhaps the most damaging intelligence breach in history. They exposed the fact that even the most powerful, most secretive intelligence agencies are vulnerable.
Their legacy is really that stark reminder that systems can be breached, secrets can be stolen, and the consequences when these kinds of cyber weapons get loose can be catastrophic. They haven't caused the same level of chaos recently, but they have popped up online occasionally since then.
Just a reminder that they're still out there.
Still lurking in the shadows.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, the shadow broker's hack was truly unprecedented. It peeled back the curtain on the NSA's incredible cyber power, but also showed just how devastating things can get when those tools fall into the wrong hands.
And the mystery of who they are, why they did it, was it money, politics, revenge, something else entirely? It just adds another layer of intrigue and maybe a bit of ongoing unease.
Absolutely. And maybe the final thought to leave our listeners with is this. Considering that Eternal Blue, the exploit that powered WannaCry and caused so much damage, was created by the very agency that got hacked, what does that tell us about the fundamental risks and responsibilities that come with developing these kinds of cyber weapons at all?
It's a critical question. The potential for blowback, for tools to be turned against their creators or innocent parties, is immense. It forces a difficult conversation about cybersecurity, offense versus defense, and national security in the digital age.
Definitely something to think about. And for everyone listening, if you found this deep dive into the world of the shadow brokers fascinating and you want more stories like this, exploring these complex events,
then please do subscribe to the deep dive. Give us a like if you enjoyed it.
Your support really does help us keep digging into these important stories and bringing them to you. Thanks for tuning in.